Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me here on the screen is Mr. Joe Clark. And we have plenty to talk about. This week, we did have to delay the show off of our normal Tuesday because of the craziness that was this past Tuesday with Aaron Rodgers having his introductory press conference. There was Cam Hayward's podcast. There was Ben Roethlisberger's podcast. A bunch of players, coaches all spoke to the media. And so we decided it would be best to delay this until Thursday. And so we have even more to talk about today. Joe, how are you doing? How are you enjoying the actual news to report on? And how's everything in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be doing better without all the pollen. The allergies have been brutal lately, but other than that, yeah, it's nice to actually, be busy and have some actual on-field football to write about and talk about.
And it is looking like we will have missed out on watching the eventual NBA champions, at least the way things are looking now. We had the opportunity in Indianapolis, but we did not go. So shame on us for that one. But fun to see them kind of doing the underdog thing. We'll dive into our topics here. The first one being Aaron Rodgers signing and just some topics from his press conference in general. First of all, I mean, Rodgers signed what was it? It was last Thursday evening, I believe, or like late afternoon, that the report came through that he was planning on reporting to Pittsburgh on Friday and signing his contract. He ultimately didn't sign until Saturday, but he is officially signed now. He passed the physical. And Aaron Rodgers signed for, what was it, a little over, I think it was $13.6 million reported at first for his base salary. There's incentives that could push that up to $19.5 million. I think with the likely to be earned portion of those incentives, it did push him up to $14.15 million, kind of for his cap hit this year. And that actually puts him in, I think it's 21st place in terms of quarterbacks overall in the league in terms of base salary this year. Conveniently placed just behind Justin Fields at number 20, who, of course, the Steelers were also interested in bringing back this year. And so Rodgers coming for a hell of a bargain to the Steelers. Joe, your reaction to, first of all, Rodgers signing, were you relieved that it was over? Were you happy that it happened in the end? Or were you kind of hoping that he was going to go away? And then also the contract figures.
Yeah, so I mean, I think relief is probably the best word to use because I mean, we all kind of knew it was going to happen. Even though initially I wasn't a huge fan of the idea, I kind of resigned myself to the fact they were going to sign him and that, every Tuesday you'd have to listen to him on the Pat McAfee show. But I mean, when you look at it, I think he is an upgrade at quarterback over what they had. I think he gives them a chance to win, at least compete for the postseason, 10, 11 wins probably. So I was just relieved that it was finally done and over with and that we could stop the endless speculation about if there's a chance that, and then another team's quarterback went down, that they were going to look to sign him, all that. So glad he was in the building, glad he signed before minicamp and kind of got a chance, even though he's only doing individual stuff as of now, at least to, meet some of his receivers and get in the building and address the team. So relief, I think, is probably a good word to use there. And then as far as the contract, I thought it was going to be overall closer to, a 15 to $20 million base, somewhere in the middle of that. So I was surprised that he came in that low, but I mean, obviously can't complain about getting him for just a hair over $14 million.
Yeah, not at all. It's hard to argue with that. And I mean, the money's kind of irrelevant. I think Dave has done a nice job at kind of illustrating that throughout the last, well, particularly over the last week, but really all offseason, talking about the cash and the cap and how those are two different things and how the Steelers needed to spend a certain amount of cash to keep up with, CBA kind of minimum spends for a certain portion, the rolling period that they have in the CBA. And so, yeah, the cash and cap kind of irrelevant, but it's nice to get him in for cheap. And some of the cap savings can, of course, roll over to next year, or they can be used on TJ Watt extension, which is, obviously expected at this point. At some point this offseason, TJ Watt holding out from mandatory minicamp, kind of taking things one step further than he had in the past. But yeah, Rodgers, I think overall, there's mixed feelings. It seems like, just what I'm sensing, there's mixed feelings in the fan base and in the media about kind of what Rodgers does for this team. But I think we've been saying it for a while now that the Steelers probably have the best quarterback that they've now had since Ben Roethlisberger's injury in 2019. So really, since 2018, we're talking about I mean, gosh, it's crazy that it's been that long already, but we're talking about 7 years have gone by since the Steelers have had a quarterback of this caliber. And so I think there is reason to be optimistic, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more time throughout the offseason to discuss win projections and all that stuff. So we'll kick that to a later show. But I did want to dive into some of Aaron Rodgers' press conference topics in his introductory press conference with the Steelers media. For one, he pointed to Mike Tomlin as a big reason why he signed, and that's no surprise. I feel like that's almost what every single free agent ever who signs with the Steelers points to. And a lot of people don't like to hear it, but Tomlin is a selling point for the Steelers and for players wanting to be here and play here. So, I think that was kind of getting that one out of the way, but more interestingly, Rodgers kind of pushed back on a narrative that's been running for a while now, and that is, how much control is he ultimately going to want? People were talking about, oh, well, did he make the Steelers wait as kind of a power play to tell them who's boss and that he's going to be running the show on offense? And Rodgers kind of pushed back on that a little bit and kind of said he's played in a system his whole career, and anyone saying differently kind of is missing the mark and it's not accurate. And so he said he's going to learn Arthur Smith's system, and he basically trusts him to run the offense. Yes, he's going to chime in and give his opinions on certain things, of course, and you would want him to as a 20-year veteran of the league. But Joe, how much of that do you buy? What else have they said about that? I think Arthur Smith even had some words about the potential for audibles and Rodgers running the offense and stuff like that. Give us a little more about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I buy what Rodgers is saying. A lot of the coaches that he's learned from, like, recently, at least, Matt LaFleur, Todd Downing, are guys that worked with Arthur Smith. So, and reportedly Arthur Smith, has been reaching out to those guys to kind of get a feel for Rodgers. So, Smith is going to make an offense that, the two of them apparently had talked for weeks prior to his signing about what the playbook would look like. So Smith will tailor his offense a little bit to Rodgers, but Rodgers isn't going to, go completely off base and run something different. And that's kind of what Smith touched on yesterday. There are the reports that he took away Russell Wilson's ability to audible at the line of scrimmage late in the season last year. He kind of gave a rambling answer about how audible means something different for every quarterback, but that, Russell Wilson was never able to call play at the line. Justin Fields was never able to call play at the line. They had their audibles, they had their checks, but there was no, going up and calling their own plays. He said, I don't know what happened in the past in Pittsburgh, with Ben Roethlisberger, but I know what we did in 2024, and that's not what we did here. So, I mean, it seems he didn't really answer directly. The question was about Aaron Rodgers and the freedom. He never, gave a direct answer to Rodgers if, he would give Rodgers that freedom or anything. But it was interesting to kind of hear him come out and flatly deny that, his quarterbacks are calling their own plays in the line of scrimmage. But I think, Rodgers is going to run what Smith gives him, and, he'll tweak, and he says to him, hey, I want this guy on a zig instead of whatever. I don't know. So some little adjustments, I'm sure they'll adapt and they'll work together. And, hopefully it's a good working relationship. But we heard last year with Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith at this point, that everything was going swimmingly and great. And then obviously the end of the season, it was a different story. So hopefully we can avoid that this year. But I think given Smith's familiarity with a lot of the people that Rodgers has worked with over the last few years, I think it should, end up going pretty well.
Yeah, and those kinds of narratives pop up, the one with Russell Wilson, those kinds of things pop up when the team is on 4 or 5 game losing streaks, and so it's no surprise that happened last year. Hopefully they can avoid that this year. The Steelers don't really have a history of those kinds of losing streaks, and so hopefully there's really no opportunity for those types of narratives to work their way in, but we will see. I'm sure there will be ups and downs of this season. Rodgers did talk about a couple other topics. He brought up Darnell Washington and compared him to one of his former teammates, Mercedes Lewis, which was, I thought, interesting and just kind of begs the question, how much hype should there be for a guy like Darnell Washington with Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh? Obviously, Pat Freiermuth's still the top tight end, and they have DK Metcalf and some of these other younger receivers, Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson. But Aaron Rodgers has made a career out of spreading the football around and getting some of these kinds of guys more targets than we've seen in recent years in Pittsburgh. And you see the Mark Kaboly tweet or the post that he made about Darnell Washington, how he's more fluid, he's faster, he's more athletic, he's basically a better receiver than he had been in his first 2 years. And I think there's a report that he shed, what did he say? He said he shed 10 to 15 pounds, I believe. And so all these things are kind of coming together to paint the picture of Darnell Washington maybe having a breakout year. Joe, do you buy that he could have a breakout year, or is it kind of getting over our skis a little bit to talk about the second tight end getting that much attention?
I think there's definitely excitement for him, at least as a red zone threat now. I mean, that was one of the big things when the Steelers drafted him that, they kind of looked at him do. I mean, we saw his rookie year in the preseason. They threw, I think, four straight fades to him and drew like three pass interference penalties against the Bills. He had the play against the Broncos last year where they threw it up to him. And I think, Aaron Rodgers has thrown a lot of those high fades in the red zone to have his guy go up and get it. And I think with Darnell Washington, his size, if he shed some weight, maybe some increased athleticism there. So I think, he's a guy that I think the Steelers might really count on in the red zone. There's the report yesterday, he had like a 20-yard touchdown, caught it. I think he shed a blocker um, there's no tackling. So broke a tackle is kind of a loose term, but scampered into the end zone. So, maybe he can do a little bit more on the run, but I mean, I don't think he's going to be, a top tight end. I still don't think he's going to be the top tight end on the Steelers. I still think Pat Freiermuth has that role, but I think, Washington can maybe be a guy we see get 5, 6 touchdowns this year just in the red zone. If not, I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself and say more than that, but I do think his potential as a red zone threat is going to be real this year.
Yeah, just looking back at Mercedes Lewis with the Packers, it looks like the most receiving yards he had with Rodgers was 214 in the season, the most receptions 23, the most touchdowns 3. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that he views Washington as some premier receiving threat, just more about his frame, what he can really add to the offense, and what kind of teammate he is in general. So yeah, but I think there's plenty to be excited about with Darnell Washington, and I personally would like to see him get more involved. The Steelers have had trouble turning those red zone drives into touchdowns, and who better to do that than a nearly 300-pound massive tight end who nobody can really cover. Another thing Rodgers talked about was feeling better from his Achilles injury. He's another year removed, and perhaps one of the biggest reasons for optimism for him to kind of have this one final good season and go out on good terms from the NFL is because last year was the season immediately following the Achilles injury, and those can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months to kind of fully recover. And then you're talking about a guy who maybe didn't get a full offseason to train because he's having to rehab his Achilles. So he's, there's now he has the kind of full offseason. I get, some of that was spent on personal stuff, but it seems like he was still staying in good shape away from the field anyways. But along with the Achilles stuff that he had, Jay Glazer also reported a list of other injuries that he suffered last year. I think he talked about a grade 2 hamstring, an MCL sprain of some variety. I think he also said a high ankle sprain. And so Rodgers was not just dealing with the Achilles, which was probably slowing him down. He was dealing with several other injuries. I think Rodgers actually pushed back on those Glazer reports and basically said, hey, how do you know it's a grade 2 hamstring? I never even had an MRI. So, okay, maybe we take out the grade 2 part of it. But he was listed with a hamstring on the injury report at some point. He was listed with a knee. He was listed with an ankle. So we know that these injuries existed to some degree. And, of course, those are going to play a part in slowing him down. And so I think that on top of the Achilles really is a reason why maybe it is okay to get a little excited about Rodgers this year with the Steelers. There's already been reports that he's moving around better than he ever did with the Jets last year. I think Louis Riddick said that on ESPN yesterday. I think 93.7 The Fans, Jeff Hathorn said something along those lines yesterday in an interview. So, Joe, if he's able to move around, and we saw kind of what his arm was able to do at the end of last season, I mean, what's stopping us from getting, really excited about this?
And I mean, I guess just the fact that, like, what's the cap of how much he can move around? He's still a 41-year-old quarterback. He's been somewhat mobile. But obviously never been a scrambler. So, I mean, I think it'll help you. And I think it helps mitigate some concern about the offensive line for sure. Because if he's able to move around a lot better than he did last year, he won't just be a statue like he kind of was with the Jets. So you kind of because I think the offensive line right now is a very real concern. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to get really excited about what the possibility could be given the quarterback Rodgers has been in his career and in the past, but I think just the age, just really how much he's going to be able to move, and the fact that he could get injured again. I mean, he dealt with all that last year. The Steelers had a myriad of soft tissue injuries last year. I mean, a hamstring could pop again. We saw with Russell Wilson's calf that took a while to heal. So then, I mean, the threat of re-injury, I guess, but that's kind of a what if. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's fair to get excited, but I think you have to kind of cap it at some point. Just given, there's still a few other concerns that you're going to have to worry about.
Well, the Jets passed the ball. Well, Rodgers had the second most passing attempts in the league last year, only after Joe Burrow. The Steelers ran the ball almost 50% of the time, which I believe was third, or it was definitely top five most in the league in terms of run percent. Might have even been second. It's up there. And so the Steelers should be able to protect Rodgers better. Maybe the offensive line will be better than his offensive line with the Jets last year. I would hope so. But even if it's not, they can kind of protect him a little better just with the scheme overall. Hopefully they're not asking him to throw quite as much. Now, I do expect them to increase how much they pass the ball with Rodgers. Arthur Smith said we didn't trade for Metcalf and pay him all that money, and we didn't sign Aaron Rodgers to run the wishbone. And so I think it's pretty clear they're going to be passing the ball more than they had been. But I think, they're not going to end up in a situation where they're the second most heavy passing offense in the league all of a sudden. That's far outside of Arthur Smith's MO. It's far outside of Mike Tomlin's MO as the head coach in recent years. So all that to say, I think yes, it is fair to, kind of wonder, could Aaron Rodgers get hurt again? Of course he could at this age. Who knows what could happen? Any player can get hurt, but I do think there's also reasons to believe that he's going to be better protected. I think the offensive line could be better, and I think that the scheme is going to protect him better as well. We're going to move on to our next topic, which is some of the stuff that coaches said about various players at minicamp. I think pretty much all position coaches, coordinators, pretty much everybody spoke to the media, at least for some length of time. Joe, I'll let you take your pick here. Where you want to start?
Yeah, I think to me, I think the biggest kind of revelation coming out was that Zach Izzani definitively called Calvin Austin the wide receiver two at this point. He talked about Austin. He said everybody overlooks number 19. That guy's a legit info receiver. He just gets separation all over the field. He'll bite your face off in the run game. Nothing affects him. He's a great leader. He can do a lot of things that two can do. And later on in the same interview, he said, I think that two spot is all Calvin's right now. There is some, I think Jerry Dulac reported either last week or the week before that, Roman Will, don't write off Roman Wilson for the number two spot. It's not assured to Calvin Austin. There's been a lot of buzz about Roman Wilson, OTAs, maybe not early on in minicamp. I think Tuesday was the day that was maybe his worst day that was reported. But throughout OTAs, there's a lot of buzz for Roman Wilson. They brought in Robert Woods, so I don't think anything was ever, assured in anybody's mind at this point that, Calvin Austin was the two. Obviously, he was going to be in that mix. But Izzani coming out and saying that right now he's the two, I think was, a pretty big news in terms of, what was revealed through their minicamp interviews.
Yeah, and that could change, obviously, if they bring somebody in. It sounds like they're still kind of pursuing other options. I think it was, who was it? Was it CBS Sports yesterday? Was it
Jonathan Jones?
Yeah, Jonathan Jones reported that the Steelers are going around lowballing everybody in the league. Omar Khan's trying to wheel and deal for another playmaker, but it sounds like they're not willing to overspend. He's just kind of throwing offers around and seeing if anybody bites. And so we'll see what comes of that. But yeah, I think I've been talking about Calvin Austin as much as anybody over the last several months. I really like Calvin Austin. I think beyond, and Izzani summed it up well. He's a high effort player. He's a good leader. He doesn't cause any issues in the locker room. He really has been improving every year, even after missing that rookie season with an injury. And so, this is my weekly call for hopefully the Steelers do reach out and try to get him signed to a extension prior to this season, because if they view him as that wide receiver too, and that's a genuine, honest belief of theirs, then yeah, they absolutely should try to extend him this offseason. They have the cash, they have the cap, make it happen. Now, obviously, Calvin Austin has to want to do that, but Izzani also said Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin are, quote, night and day from where they were last year. He said, obviously, Roman is behind Calvin because, well, Roman hasn't really seen the field yet, but both players are ahead of where they were, and that, of course, is good news for the Steelers. Omar Khan, when he traded George Pickens, said, we wouldn't have done this if we weren't, excited or happy with our wide receiver room. that we have right now. And I think he said that last year, and it kind of was hard to believe because there wasn't much to be excited about. I think there is stuff to be excited about this time around. We've talked about Roman Wilson. We've talked about Calvin Austin. I think there's plenty to be excited about between those two. So, yeah, I agree. That was one of the biggest takeaways. Another interesting thing, Carl Dunbar, the defensive line coach, said Derrick Harmon is the starter. The Steelers kind of don't do that ever. Name their rookies a starter before training camp even happens. Usually they make them earn it, but it is kind of difficult to dance around that fact this year. I mean, who are they going to... I mean, I guess you call Daniel Aquale the starter, but...
Louder milk.
Yeah, louder. I mean, yeah, it's like, how serious can you take him if he's saying this stuff? I don't know. I mean, we haven't heard Mike Tomlin speak yet since yesterday. I would imagine he was probably asked about Harmon being the starter, and I would be curious to see what his answer was to that question, because I wouldn't be surprised if Tomlin kind of pushed back on that and gave a different approach. Because, I mean, when's the last time Tomlin talked about somebody as a starter out of the gate like that? Like, was it Pouncey? I mean... it doesn't happen often with Tomlin. He makes these guys earn it, and I think for good reason. So, yeah, an interesting one there. Brandon Johnson from Azani. He's kind of maybe a hidden sleeper in the wide receiver room. Joe, I think you wrote about this one, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so Azani said that he was the reason why the Steelers signed Brandon Johnson and waived by the Broncos late last in the offseason last year, signed to the Steelers practice squad in late August. Azani recruited him in Tennessee, coached him in Denver. He said he helped get him into Denver and he helped get him to the Steelers. And I think he's kind of an interesting player. I mean, in Denver in 2023, at a limited role, but he had 19 catches, 284 yards, 4 touchdowns. If the Steelers do keep, 6 receivers on the active roster, given that, they have a little bit of depth, but they don't have anybody assured to step up as a number two, it doesn't hurt to have a guy like Johnson, maybe as their sixth guy, if he's somebody that, they think can help him. And Azani, he said he can take tough coaching. He said he really wants to see him compete in the Trobe. So, I mean, he's got Azani in his corner, and I think he could be, pretty solid depth. Maybe somebody that ends up making a few plays if he can find a way onto this roster. And even if he doesn't, he can still get signed to the practice squad. And then, one guy goes down. He was a game day elevation 3 times last year. So he's at least somebody that might be able to get, a little bit of use out of this season.
And I want to say he's Chad Ochocinco's cousin. Am I off base there? I want to say he's related in some way to Chad Johnson.
He might be. And I know he's the son of Charles Johnson, who used to play for the Marlins.
Yeah, so he's got athletic bloodlines. I'll have to double check on that Chad Ochocinco thing, but I believe that to be the case. So an interesting guy all around, and I mean, certainly there's opportunity in this wide receiver room. They didn't end up bringing in Gabe Davis. We'll see if they bring someone else in, but if they don't, then yeah, there's absolutely opportunity for somebody like Brandon Johnson to stick. And Azani said that he can help us this year, so we'll take his word for that. We know he certainly has at least one coach banging the table for him every day, so that helps. Another just kind of interesting snippet is the fact that Tom Arth played as a player in the NFL alongside Rodgers. He also played alongside Peyton Manning, and so he kind of spent time alongside 2 of the best quarterbacks to ever do it, and he compared them at minicamp the other day. He said, let me pull up the direct quote here, "Peyton and Aaron, you're talking about 2 of the greatest to ever do it, and nobody can argue that. I think there's a lot of similarities between them. They're different players, different athletes, things like that. But in terms of their approach, their preparation, their ability to process information, and to play a cerebral game, I think they're pretty similar in that regard." Obviously, nobody's directly comparing Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers. Manning was about as close to a statue in the pocket as you can get. Rodgers always had a little bit of a mobility to his game. So they're different in a lot of ways, but what he was mostly getting at is above the neck and what they can offer in terms of just their knowledge of the game, their approach to the game, and what they can do for the offense, getting them in the correct positions. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but that's another big reason to be excited for Rodgers is, we talked about him limiting the offensive line's exposure because his quick release, he's able to get the ball out in 2.6 seconds as opposed to Justin Fields at like 3 seconds and Russell Wilson at like 2.9 or something. But I think he's also going to help them out in that he can kind of protect them from losing situations before the ball is ever snapped. If he sees the box is loaded, he can, check to a quick passing play. If he sees that a blitz is coming, there's, various things he can check into from there. And so that's part of kind of going back to how much power Rodgers will have within the offense. He said, sometimes there's 2 or 3 plays called in the huddle. My job is to get us in the right one. And so if he's choosing the right play consistently, that is going to instantly make a huge change to this offense overall. And so an interesting comparison from Arth on Manning and Rodgers. I think there were some other things. I think McCurley talked about, the inside linebackers coach talked about Peyton Wilson, and there was some other stuff. But we're going to move on to, I think this is a big topic that's going to get a lot of runtime today in maybe the local news, the local radio stations, and might even bleed over into the national stuff, because over the weekend, Adam Schefter talked about Aaron Rodgers being the Steelers' 3rd option at quarterback, and that made waves around the internet. We wrote about it on Sunday, I think. And he kind of clarified some of that today via I think it's a Cleveland radio station, 97.1 The Fan. Is that Cleveland? I think that's Cleveland.
It's Cleveland.
Rothman and Ice is the show there. He kind of clarified that statement, and actually, I think a lot of us were assuming Justin Fields was the first option because, well, Art Rooney said it, basically, that his preference was to re-sign either Wilson or Fields, and I think kind of the running narrative has been that Fields was the first option that the Steelers were all in on at first, but Schefter kind of painted a different picture today, saying that Stafford was the first choice. So the Steelers basically moved into the offseason, and their first call was to the Rams to try and see what they could do for Matthew Stafford. When that failed, they went on to Justin Fields, and when that failed, they kind of ended up in this waiting game for Aaron Rodgers. And so, Joe, could this be a possible explanation why Fields ultimately chose elsewhere? I mean, we look at the money, it's similar to what they gave Rodgers. I don't think they would have had a problem giving Fields that money if they liked him as much as they said they did, and if he really was their first option. But it seems like he wasn't their first option. Could he have just been ticked off that once again the Steelers were choosing somebody else over him?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly viable reason for why he might have left. I mean, I don't know how serious the Steelers' pursuit was of, Matthew Stafford. There's reports that they made calls and then they checked in. But I think that alone would probably annoy Fields if the Steelers are telling him, hey, we want you to be our starter. But then it's coming out, this was all coming out around the combine in March, kind of at a key point for the Steelers to get a deal done with Fields, that, they had checked in on Matthew Stafford and, at least trying to acquire him. So I think that definitely could have been a reason that kind of just deterred Fields from coming back to Pittsburgh, because back in his head, maybe he's thinking maybe they have somebody else that they want to go out and, if somebody else comes available, then I'm just going to be the backup again.
Yeah, I thought that was the kind of big story, because I think a lot of people have assumed that Fields went elsewhere because of the money, and maybe that was part of it, or because they benched him last year, and maybe that was part of it. But there kind of, in my mind at least, seemed to be a missing piece of the puzzle of like, okay, why? I think that the Steelers probably could have gotten close on the money. I think that, they probably could have convinced him, okay, yeah, we made a mistake last year, and you are going to be the starter for a full 17 games and have that clear runway to start that you're looking for. But, what was the missing piece? And, well, maybe it's the fact that they went out and basically said publicly with Art Rooney that they wanted to re-sign Fields, but then were talking out of the other side of their mouth and going and pursuing somebody like Stafford. And, if his agent catches wind of that, then that might become an issue in terms of being able to bring him back. And so I think Schefter also kind of clarified that Rodgers wasn't necessarily the third choice. It wasn't as if they ranked these guys in order. I think you can probably safely say that they did rank Stafford and Fields in order if they reached out to Stafford first, because all things equal, that they could have made either of those happen relatively early in the March kind of free agent window process there. But Rodgers is somebody that they kind of knew early on was going to need some time to make up his mind. I think Rodgers told everybody on the Pat McAfee show that, he was upfront with teams right away that things were going to run on his timeline. And so if the Steelers kind of got the sense that Rodgers was going to take, time to make up his mind, then it makes sense that they were, okay, let's go for the sure thing and pursue Fields, pursue Stafford, and Rodgers can kind of be our backup plan, not in the sense that they view him as the third option or, the third best option of that list, just in the sense that, well, who knows what Rodgers is going to do if we do wait on him. And so I think, at least the way that I've kind of mocked all this up in my head, is they swung and missed on Stafford, which potentially cost them on Fields, which pushed them into a situation where it made it necessary to wait for Aaron Rodgers for 3 months. And here we are. So, yeah, I thought that was an interesting clarification from Schefter. I think that one's going to get talked about a lot in the coming couple of days here, especially as minicamp breaks and we're entering the kind of slowest part of the year in the NFL calendar. So, Joe, did I miss anything there? Is there anything else that you want to talk about on that topic?
Yeah, no, just kind of crazy that there's an alternate universe where Matthew Stafford's with the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers with the Rams.
Right, yeah, because Sean McVay said that they had kind of checked in and he was definitely a consideration. And so, yeah, that sounds like maybe there was some smoke to that whole situation where the Steelers were trying to lure Stafford away, and there you have it. McVay was trying to get Rodgers. So, yeah, absolutely would have been a wild, even more wild offseason than it ended up being. So, we're going to move on to a listener question. And this one is from, I believe it is Avi. I might be saying that incorrectly. We'll hear in just a moment. Avi from New York. I think this is his second time asking a question. If you want to have your question answered on a future show, that's 412-254-3145. You can call and leave a voicemail, or you can text the line, and we will answer your question on a future episode.
Hey, guys. This is Avi. I live in New York. Long-time listener. Thanks, second-time caller here on the deep dive. I got a fun one for y'all. Figured I'd ask, kind of a silly question here. Let's say through some form of magic or scientific breakthrough, you get the opportunity to time travel in order to watch exactly one NFL game of your choice that you did not get to see in person when it occurred. So you might have been able to see the game on TV, but you just weren't there for it. What game would that be for you? A couple I had in mind, of course. One that comes in mind that I wasn't alive for, and I don't think either of you were either, is Super Bowl 13. The Steelers faced the Cowboys. Cowboys had Staubach, Dorsett, Hill, Pearson. Steelers had Bradshaw, Harris, Swan, and Stallworth. Or could it be one in the Ben era? Right, Steelers versus Cardinals in the Super Bowl, an all-time great, and maybe a cult classic or one that I really enjoy, the 2019 December comeback against the Ravens, where Bell and Brown had over 335 combined yards, and we locked up the AFC North at home. It could also be, teams that you're not a fan of, that were just epic games, but yeah. Curious to know what you guys think, and looking forward to hearing back.
All right, Joe, if we were able to do our best Back to the Future or Doctor Who impression and go back to a game, which game would you choose and why?
But I think I would go with the 2008 AFC Championship when the Steelers beat the Ravens. I just think that game there were so many Pro Bowlers on the field, just two genuinely high-level teams, and the Steelers won and we're going to the Super Bowl. So I think it would have been a fun game to go back and witness and experience the highs.
Fair enough. That's a good choice. Was that the one of the Palomalu pick six game?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely a good choice there, no doubt. Mine's a little different. It's a less weighty game, and perhaps that's a lame approach. Obviously, I could say one of the Super Bowls would be great to go see in person, and it is a goal of mine to eventually make it to a Super Bowl. I think that would be fun. But I'm a big fan of offense, and what better than I'm also a big fan of the Bumblebee jersey. So that game, I forget exactly which year that would have been. Was that 2016, 17, when Ben Roethlisberger lit up the Indianapolis Colts for almost
16.
I think it was 522 yards and 6 touchdowns. It was 2014. Dang, it's earlier than I thought. Yeah, absolutely lit up the Colts. 522 yards, 6 touchdowns, almost broke the single game passing record set by, I think, Norm Van Brocklin or something like that. He came pretty close. And yeah, I mean, what more could you want in a game? The Steelers absolutely lit them up. I think it was also a close game and that the Colts put up a fair amount of points on top of it. And so if you're a fan of offense, which I am, that was a pretty fun game to watch. Maybe a little bit of a different choice for me and probably going to be told I'm wrong on that one, but that is what I would do. We do have some other questions here. Do we have time? We don't. So we're going to circle back to some of these other questions. Michael Adesso, we've got some. Brett, our frequent caller from San Angelo, Texas. We will also circle back to those questions on a future episode. We appreciate everybody who calls in, 412-254-3145. Joe, you're going on vacation here pretty soon, aren't you?
Yeah, yep. I will be gone. I'm going to Myrtle Beach on Monday, and I'll be gone Monday to Monday.
Okay, so I'll figure out who our co-host is next week. Maybe I'll bring on Josh Carney. Maybe I'll bring on Alex Kozora for a guest episode. We will figure that out, but more than likely that will be back on our normal day, Tuesday. This week was just because the craziness of minicamp on this last Tuesday with Rodgers. So all that said, I am Ross. That is Joe. Joe, enjoy your vacation, and we will catch you guys next time.